My cousin's lie ruined my life. She made an accusation so devastating that my own parents believed her without a second thought. I lost everything: my home, my family, my future. Now, years later, as she lies dying, she has finally decided to tell the truth. But my family still expects me to stay silent. Jade and I were close when we were kids. She was 4 years older than me, raised by my uncle, my mom's younger brother, a single father who did everything for her. After his wife left, he never remarried, dedicating himself to giving Jade the best life he could. He worked hard, made sacrifices, and even set aside a college fund to ensure her future. But when Jade turned 18, things changed. My uncle told her he had done everything he could for her, and now she was on her own financially. He had to think about his own retirement. To me, that seemed fair. But to Jade, it was a betrayal. She believed he owed her more, that he should continue to support her for as long as she wanted. The fights between them became constant, and after every argument, she would storm into my house, venting to my mom about how unfair her father was. She wanted someone to take her side, and my mom always listened patiently, but I stayed out of it. One evening, she showed up at our house unexpectedly while my parents were out. I assumed she would leave once she realized my mother wasn't there, but instead, she stayed, clearly looking for someone to unload her frustrations on. I wasn't interested in hearing it, but she didn't give me a choice. She started complaining again, going on about how her father was abandoning her, how she couldn't possibly work while studying, and how unfair it all was. I had heard enough. I told her my uncle had done more than enough for her. He had raised her, provided for her, and given her the foundation to be independent. If she wanted to continue her education, she had to do what most people did: get a job and pay for it herself. She had majored in STEM, and I knew that whatever job she found would be enough to help her support herself. She just had to try. That was not what she wanted to hear. Her expression changed instantly. She started screaming at me, calling me spoiled, privileged, and heartless. She said I had no idea what it was like to struggle because my parents had given me everything. I didn't argue. I had nothing else to say. But as she kept shouting, I realized something: I had never seen her this angry before. After a few minutes, she stormed out of the house, still sobbing. I thought that was the end of it. I figured she would calm down and move on like she always did. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke up to my parents standing over me, looking shaken. They said my uncle and Jade were downstairs. They said it was urgent. Confused, I went downstairs, only to find Jade sitting there in tears, acting as though she could barely speak. And then, she said it. She accused me of sexually assaulting her the night before. The room fell silent. My uncle looked devastated. My parents were in shock. I was too stunned to even process what I was hearing. She spoke through sobs, telling them that after she came over last night, I had lured her in and forced myself on her while my parents were out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to defend myself, tried to say something, anything, but no one listened. My uncle couldn't even look at me, and my parents avoided eye contact. And then, the worst part. My parents begged my uncle for forgiveness. Right in front of me, they pleaded with him not to report me to the police, promising that they would handle it themselves. My innocence didn't matter. They had already decided I was guilty. I felt like I was suffocating. My whole world was crashing down. I lost control and grabbed a vase, throwing it against the wall, desperate for them to listen to me. But instead of hearing me out, my father snapped. He grabbed me, dragged me upstairs, and locked me in my room. I pounded on the door, screaming that Jade was lying. My fists hurt from banging so hard, but no one came. No one listened. Hours later, my father finally let me out. Not to apologize. Not to tell me they had come to their senses. Instead, he told me their decision had been made. Jade and my uncle had agreed not to press charges, but only under one condition: I had to disappear. They had promised I would be sent far away, out of their lives, never to return. I was being exiled for a crime I didn't commit. But that wasn't even the worst part. My parents had also decided to take my college fund and give it to Jade. I fought back. I begged them to see reason, but it was useless. My father had already arranged for me to live with my great-uncle, someone I despised, a man with a terrible temper and a history of treating people like dirt. My mother barely looked at me. She was crying, but said nothing. My father was cold, distant. It was as if I wasn't their son anymore. A few days later, I was forced to leave. My parents didn't say goodbye. They didn't hug me. They barely even looked at me. It was like I had never existed. They confiscated my phone, cutting me off from the world. They told all my friends and extended family that I had chosen to disappear, that I needed space to heal from some trauma I had gone through. They made sure no one would come looking for me. And to make sure I stayed gone, they warned me that if I ever tried to reach out, they would destroy my life completely. All because of a lie. My great-uncle picked me up and took me to his house, and just like that, I was gone. The people who were supposed to love and protect me had thrown me away without a second thought. For months, I lived with my great-uncle, a man who had no idea why I had been sent to him, but he didn't care. He was cruel, bitter, and made it clear that he saw me as a burden. He taunted me constantly, treated me like garbage, and acted as if he was doing me a favor by letting me stay in his house. I was trapped, alone, and completely cut off from the life I once had. All because Jade decided to lie. Living with my great-uncle was like being in a prison, except there were no walls, just the weight of being completely alone. He had no idea why I had been sent to live with him, and he didn't care. He treated me like an inconvenience, making sure I knew how unwanted I was. He had a temper, a cruel sense of humor, and a way of making me feel like nothing. Every day was filled with his taunts and passive-aggressive comments, and I had no choice but to endure it. After a few weeks, I realized there was no point in feeling sorry for myself. My parents had cut me off, refused any contact, and made sure I had no way of reaching out to anyone from my past. I couldn't go back home. I couldn't go to college. My entire future had been stolen from me, and there was nothing I could do to change it. But I knew one thing: I couldn't stay in my great-uncle's house forever. I had no education, no money, and no idea where to start. But I had to find a way out. I started job hunting, applying for anything that would take me. After weeks of rejections and frustration, I finally landed a warehouse job. It was exhausting. The pay was barely enough to get by, but at least it gave me an escape. The moment I got my first paycheck, I packed my things and left without saying a word to my great-uncle. I knew he wouldn't care. It was just good riddance to him. For the first time in months, I had control over my life. I was lucky enough to meet a few coworkers around my age who were also struggling financially. We pooled our money together and rented a tiny apartment, and over time, they became like family to me. We all worked long hours and barely scraped by, but we had each other, and that was more than I had before. Even though the warehouse job was physically demanding, I refused to settle. My friends and I made a pact we wouldn't let this be our future. We all kept searching for better jobs, and after months of grinding, we started to move up. I eventually landed a position in sales, which paid significantly better. My friends also found jobs that suited them, and after 3 years of working and saving, we were finally in a better place. For the first time since my exile, life felt stable. I had built something on my own. And that's exactly when my parents decided to reach out. 3 years of complete silence. 3 years of nothing. Then, out of nowhere, my father sent me an email. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was filled with apologies for what had happened, for how they handled things, for not believing me. He said he wanted to reconnect and asked for my address and phone number so we could talk. He also left his contact information in case I wanted to reach out first. And then, I saw why he was suddenly sorry. Jade had finally admitted the truth. She was dying. She had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and after months of suffering, she had confessed to everything. She admitted she had lied. That she had ruined my life for no reason. That she had let my family turn their backs on me, knowing I was innocent. And now, my parents suddenly wanted to make things right. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling nothing. For 3 years, I had been treated like a criminal. My parents had thrown me away without a second thought, stolen my future, and left me to survive on my own. And now, because Jade was dying, they wanted to act like none of it ever happened? I kept reading, and the more I learned, the more I realized how pathetic Jade's life had turned out. After taking my college fund, she didn't even go back to school. Instead, she took a gap year and traveled the world, spending the money to find herself. By the time she returned home, she had already wasted most of it. She begged my parents for more money, but they had nothing left to give her. Her father refused to bail her out anymore. She had no job, no degree, and no real plan. She tried working for a while, but quickly gave up. She had spent so much time living in luxury that she didn't know how to survive without it. Then, she got sick. Her cancer diagnosis changed everything. She had to sell her apartment and everything she owned to afford treatment. Now, with nothing left, she was dying. And now, she suddenly had a conscience. I didn't feel sorry for her. After reading my father's email, I had a choice to make. Did I want to reconnect with my parents? Did I even want to acknowledge them? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I told my roommates everything, the full story. The reason I had been kicked out, the lie Jade had told, and the way my family had turned on me. Up until that moment, I had never shared the truth. My friends only knew that I had been cut off after a bad argument with my parents. When I finished telling them everything, their reactions were exactly what I expected: anger, disbelief, and disgust. They told me not to go back, not to forgive my parents. That after everything they did, I owed them nothing. And they were right. For 3 years, I had lived in silence, in fear, letting my parents dictate my fate. But Jade had stolen my life, and I had every right to take it back. So instead of answering my father's email, I did something else. I wrote back and told him exactly what I was going to do. I was going to tell the world the truth. No more silence. No more protecting Jade. No more covering up their mistakes. I had proof, screenshots of the email, Jade's confession, everything. I could finally clear my name. I didn't care if Jade was dying. I didn't care if my parents begged me not to. The world deserved to know what she had done. And as soon as I sent that message, my phone exploded with calls and texts. My parents. My uncle. Desperate, begging me not to do this. They said Jade had suffered enough. They said she had already gotten her karma. But what about me? Where was their concern when they threw me away? Where was their regret when I was struggling to survive? I had 3 years stolen from me. And now it was my turn to take something back. I didn't hesitate. I told my father exactly what I was going to do. For 3 years, I'd been silent, forced to disappear because of a lie. Jade had destroyed my life, and now, as she lay dying, my parents expected me to keep quiet for her sake. But I had nothing left to lose. I told my father I was going to tell the truth to everyone. And then, I did. I wrote everything down. Every detail of what had happened. How Jade had accused me, how my parents had believed her without hesitation, how they had sent me away and stolen my future. I attached the proof screenshots of my father's email, Jade's confession, and everything that showed how they had abandoned me. Then, I posted it. For the first time in 3 years, I let the world know what had really happened. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, people from my past, old friends, extended family, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, started reaching out. They told me they had never forgotten about me, that they had tried to contact my parents, only to be told I had left on my own, that I didn't want to be found. I found out that my parents had lied to everyone, telling them I had suffered some kind of trauma and needed space. They had told my friends to leave me alone, pretending it was for my own good. And because no one wanted to pressure me, they listened. But now, after reading my story, they finally knew the truth. People were furious. Some had always been skeptical of Jade now. They saw her for who she really was. Even family members who had once stayed neutral were now cutting ties with my parents and my uncle. My mother and father had spent years trying to protect Jade's name. Now, their lies were falling apart. But the best part? Jade had lost everything. Her friends abandoned her. The family members who had once supported her now refused to even speak to her. She was completely alone. And my parents? They finally reached out again, not to apologize, but to tell me they were disappointed in me. They told me I should have just let sleeping dogs lie, that Jade was already suffering, and that I had only made things worse. They said she deserved peace in her final days. I couldn't believe it. Even after everything, even after knowing the truth, they still cared more about her than they ever did about me. I told them their disappointment meant nothing to me, that an apology would never be enough, that after what they did, they had no right to ask me for anything. They still wanted me to pretend like nothing had happened, but I wasn't their son anymore. So I blocked them. I should have done it years ago, but back then I was too afraid, too lost, too desperate to believe they might regret what they did. But I saw things clearly now. For 3 years, I had been erased from their lives. Now I was erasing them from mine. With everything out in the open, I finally felt free. And that weekend, I did something I had been waiting years to do. I went back home not to see my parents, but to see the people who had truly cared about me all along. My real family. My closest friends insisted I stay with them instead of booking a hotel, and I agreed. The moment I saw them again, it felt like I had never left. We laughed, caught up, and for the first time in years, I felt at home. I visited other relatives too, the ones who had cut off my parents after learning the truth. They hugged me, told me they had missed me, and reassured me that I was never the problem. By the end of the trip, one thing was clear: my parents had lost everyone. The only people left in their corner were Jade and my uncle, and from what I heard, even he wasn't standing by them anymore. In the end, people will always stand for the truth. And I was done hiding mine. After years of pain, betrayal, and loss, I had finally taken my life back. And I had never felt stronger.